golden thread. So in the welcome week, I talked about the process of researching and writing the dissertation as a Gordian knot. And in the example that I showed, I drew a picture. And at the very end of that picture, you can see those three strands that we talked about weaving together. Now imagine that process continuing. And imagine that braid becoming tighter and tighter until it becomes a singular thread. That thread, which writers sometimes refer to the golden thread, ours is multicolored, but stick with me, should weave through your writing. It holds your writing together and it becomes a reference point for your readers to follow as they move through the introduction chapter and as you build an argument that moves from a broad topic to a concept or pointed research questions. So at this level of scholarly work, we are dealing with concepts, phenomena, framework that are extremely complex, and the reader needs to know how they are related. That's what the golden thread will help us do. And this is not necessarily done through the sections that are delineated by section headings, but by the order of the paragraphs and the transitions between them. The golden thread is sometimes hard to string together. See what I did there? Sometimes it doesn't emerge from our first drafts of our writing. And sometimes we're so bogged down in our writing, our thoughts don't seem to obviously fit together. And the logic that made so much sense in our mind doesn't translate well to the page. Suddenly our then moving logically through an inverted triangle as we hone in on our argument. And as writers, when this happens, we're stuck. And sometimes we don't realize what we wrote reads as a logic spiral to the reader, and we don't realize the reader gets stuck as well. Today, we're going to play with a writing tool known as a reverse outline. I'm going to do a worked example of a reverse outline. And as I do the work of reverse outlining, I'm also going to be critically analyzing the writing to see if the golden thread is easy to identify by considering the order of the paragraphs, the internal structure of the paragraphs, and the transitions between the paragraphs. I'm also going to be looking for redundancies and circular reasoning. During the work example, I'll also be narrating my thoughts as a reader, talk about what could have been added to make the writing a little bit more clear. Also note how the organization of this exemplar chapter that we'll be looking at relates to the three main sections or three big chunks or the three big questions, however you want to frame that we talked about in the first lesson. I'll also describe how these fit into the inverted triangle that you saw in the last mini lesson as well. I'm going to switch over and show you a view of the document along with a blank Word document to work on. I'm not going to reverse outline the whole chapter because that would make for a very painful video to watch. However, I will at the end talk through the organization of the chapter as a whole. The dissertation I'm using is by Dr. Sarah Grace, who did her Ed.D. through the University of Arizona. You're going to notice that the format that she uses is slightly different from the Edgewood template. And this will also be true of the other dissertations, introductions that you examined for our assignment this week. Dr. Grace begins with a writing device known as a hook. It appears to be part of a transcript from a faculty interview meant to draw the reader into the dissertation in a compelling way. In this case, it really does a good job framing the focus of her dissertation and adding details in a way that is easier to read than it would be in a list in the introduction. I don't know how well you can see my screen, so I'm going to go ahead and read this to you. One thing I would have never expected was how open the students were about what was going on in their lives. Like, I guess I was assuming that there would be a barrier there and that they wouldn't tell me these very intimately personal things that I would never have wanted to know, but they were all really like open books. Some of those books were filled with trauma, and it really opened my eyes to how horrible some of our students' situations are that they live in. And this wasn't something, I've been trained to know how to handle or was expecting to need to handle. I had students who either talked about how they had attempted suicide earlier, or they were talking about how they'd been sexually assaulted, or their roommate had, or that they were abusing drugs. Just very, very open. And I didn't know how to counteract that because it was clear that these students needed help. At least by sharing with me, I hopefully could funnel them to a resource that would help them, because I'm not that resource and I don't want to claim to be. I'm not trained to help in that way, and I don't want to do more damage. I knew this wasn't a good situation for my mental health and potentially for my students' mental health. So I even asked some of my colleagues in my chair, but they only saw it as a good thing, which is kind of frustrating because essentially they said, "Oh, that's so great," and that they trust you. And I was like, "No, I mean, thank you for the compliment. It's nice, but you're missing the point. This is damaging to me. This was a female faculty interview. I'm actually not going to add this to my reverse outline because it isn't technically an essential part of the argument that she's developing chapter 1. In fact, although I've seen this done, I've seen it done rarely. And I don't mind it at all if it's pithy and pertinent, but other readers could find it a bit cloying. It depends on the reader and it depends on the discipline. I think just in general, it's actually a good strategy if you're not sure where or how to get started. Even if something like this isn't in your final draft, by writing something like this, you can use it as an on-ramp into your scholarly voice, kind of as a warm-up into your introduction. Okay, so now we get to the more traditional opening of chapter 1, and now I'll actually begin the reverse outline. You know that there's many ways to construct an outline, reverse or otherwise, and that's something we'll talk a little bit about in the next coming weeks. I'm actually going to fall back for me on the method that I feel most comfortable with. I use Roman numerals to denote the paragraphs, not the headings, just the paragraphs. And then I do a capital letter A, and then one level down in the logic hierarchy, I use a number 1. And if I were going to go one more level down in the logic hierarchy, I would use a small letter A. So that's what you're going to see on mine. Bullet points, you can use whatever sort of hierarchy strategy that you wanted. That's just how I tend to do it. Let's take a look at chapter 1. As demonstrated in the interview excerpt above, teaching in higher education can be a deeply emotional experience for both faculty and students. As some have simply and powerfully said, professors have emotions. Until recently, researchers paid little attention to the emotions that higher education faculty have and the subsequent emotional labor that they perform. If emotions were studied at all, the focus was generally on the emotional experience of students, leaving tremendous room for further emotional exploration in an academic setting. Faculty, for the most part, have been left out of the conversations, research, and institutional emotional support that students have been receiving for years. Let's flip over to the reverse outline and take a look at how I took this paragraph apart. Roman numeral 1, teaching in higher education can be deeply emotional. That was the topic sentence. A, faculty emotions are rarely studied. 1, this also includes the subsequent emotional labor. Now there's one more sentence there that kind of repeats A, that faculty have been rarely studied. So it would be kind of redundant to put that back in the outline. So I'll just leave it at that. You can see two things here in this paragraph. First, that the paragraph itself, the internal structure of paragraph itself is starting to shape like a inverted triangle, that it starts from broad and goes down to specifics of what she's going to be talking about. There's another thing we can see here. As a reader, I'm expecting the rest of the dissertation and most likely the rest of the introduction to follow this roadmap that she laid out here in the very opening paragraph. I'm going to be expecting she's going to talk about why teaching in higher education can be deeply emotional. I'm going to expect her to address the fact that faculty emotions are rarely studied, including the emotional labor that faculty end up performing. So what I assume the introduction chapter is going to look like, assume that the literature review will also kind of follow this structure that she's laid out. And I also assume that chapter 4 and probably chapter 5 will have the discussion and conclusions kind of laid out in this organizational pattern as well. Let's take a look at paragraph 2 and see how it relates to paragraph number 1. This project will look at faculty accounts of emotional experiences in the workplace. Specifically, this project will examine how faculty in higher education talk about emotions in teaching, the way emotional labor manifests itself in higher education faculty, and the relationships between emotions and the environment. Using a constructivist framework and a mixed methods research design, faculty emotion experiences will be explored, discussed, and analyzed. Okay, not so much going on there. It's contributing to narrowing down the topic. Let's just take it apart and put it in my reverse outline. Roman numeral 2, paragraph 2. Project focuses on faculty accounts of emotional labor by A, looking at how the faculty talk about emotions and teaching, how emotional labor manifests itself in higher education, and how emotions relate to the environment. All right, on to paragraph number 3. This project contributes to the ongoing conversations about emotions in education in several ways. 1, by using a mixed method design with surveys, focus groups, and interviews. This project provides multiple ways of exploring and analyzing the ways emotions and teaching interact. And 2, this study showcases the emotional experience of higher education faculty, a topic and group rarely studied. Let's take a look at how this plays out on our reverse outline. Roman numeral number 3, paragraph 3. This project will make a contribution by A, looking at faculty emotions and emotional labor through a mixed methods approach, and B, showcase faculty emotions. So I'm looking at the internal structure of this paragraph as well. And personally, I'd actually flip A and B around because showcasing faculty emotions can be done via a mixed methods approach. So I think B actually feeds into A. I'm also left at the end of this paragraph with the sense that something is missing here. Like, why does this contribution matter? Why is mixed methods in and of itself a contribution? Why is it necessary to showcase faculty emotions? We'll see if that gets covered later on. I hope this isn't the only argument she has about why this dissertation needs to exist. We'll see how that happens. It may manifest itself in the statement of the problem. One of the things I'm going to do here, because we're going to flip over to a new section in her dissertation, is ask you the question, a thinking question here. Do these introductory paragraphs have a golden thread? And could you summarize it in one sentence? Or if you are somebody who likes to tweet, could you tweet about this in 1 or 2 sentences? All right, we are on to a new section of this dissertation. It is the statement of the problem, or I'll put in the reverse outline, the problem statement. You're gonna see that I put the headings in bold because although they are important, they're not actually indicative of the golden thread. You can have headings and the stuff within the headings may not flow together. The first 3 paragraphs led us to this problem statement, and this is where Dr. Gray starts to answer that first big question. Why do we need to know more about that topic? I'm also going to note that all right, let's take a look at paragraph number 4. Research on emotional labor and teaching in higher education is sparse, and research on the relationship between faculty emotions and teaching is a relatively unexplored area. However, what research has been conducted shows a connection between positive emotions or emotions that promote goals and teaching approaches. Additionally, negative emotions or emotions that thwart goals are connected with burnout and emotional exhaustion and other significant health issues. The experience and expression of discrete emotions, enjoyment, anxiety, and boredom, is another underexplored area of study in higher education. As these emotions are frequently experienced by faculty during their teaching, it makes sense to explore these constructs more fully. All right, this is how this plays out on our reverse outline over here. There's a dearth of research in this area because research has typically focused on teaching and the effect of positive emotion, teaching and the effects of negative emotion, missing research, and what's missing is research on discrete emotions. At the end of paragraph 4, I think there's a little bit of something missing that could tie things together more tightly. I don't think it's tragic or anything like that, but I would like a 1-sentence wrap up to maybe explain the relationship, if there is one, between A, B, and C. I might like another one that tells me why it makes sense to explore these constructs more fully. That's what she says in this end sentence. I'm still left with, okay, yeah, it seems important, but why does it make sense? Let's take a look at paragraph number 5. Paragraph number 5 starts right here. Understanding the role of emotions, emotional labor, and teaching as they relate to faculty motivation, physical and mental health, and job commitment is vitally important in order to provide work environments where faculty can flourish and not just survive. Answers why it makes sense to study these things. So she does take care of that there. However, researchers know very little about how emotions influence teaching because teacher beliefs, teacher thinking, and what teachers know has tended to dominate educational psychology research. The way in which faculty experience emotions and teaching in higher education is an area in need of more explanation. Let's take this apart a little bit further in our reverse outline. This is important because, so that answers why does it make sense to study it. We need to understand emotions in faculty in relation to their impact on motivation, physical health, job commitment, because B, we need to provide a better work environment, but we really don't understand this well because there are other areas of research that have been dominant. Okay, and you can see that she has narrowed this down even further and talked a little bit why this is important and really has answered that really big question here. Why is this important? I also want you to take a look at how that last paragraph pulls the 2 paragraphs of the problem statement together. I added also, see how this section responds to that first overarching question. Why do we need to know more about this topic? Yet continues to narrow in terms of that inverted triangle. At this point, could you say this is what is being researched and why it needs to be researched? If so, then the golden thread truly is emerging and has run through these first 5 paragraphs. I've been referencing these 3 big questions that we talked about in our first mini lesson this week. Why do we want to know more about your topic? And I think that Dr. Grace has answered that part of her introduction through the problem statement. I think she is starting to, and probably hopefully at some point, we'll talk a little bit more about how her research will contribute or extend existing knowledge. I think she's referenced that somewhat. Maybe she hasn't said it as explicitly, so that it's easy to see there. Maybe we have to intuit that. And then third question, how is she framing and scoping her research? Now we know about our inverted triangle. This is the one that I used in mini lesson number 1, and it follows the Edgewood template. We've gotten down to the formal problem statement. She did not include population, not if that's necessary in the template she needed to use. She did not, she sort of alluded again how she will be addressing the problem. And we'll see if there's a purpose statement that comes out and how she has introduced her research questions. She said it's mixed methods, and if there's hypotheses. She's referenced her rationale and methods a bit. We'll see, as we can see right over here, she's going to be using the theoretical framework and the summary. I want you to note the differences between this Edgewood template and what Dr. Grace does, and to see that they both can probably work. Right after the formal problem statement, Dr. Grace starts talking about how she will be basically addressing the problem. And we talked about that in the first mini lesson, that how you're going to address the problem usually does have 2 parts. It's usually that purpose statement and then the theoretical framework. Well, she flip-flops this around, something I also talked about in mini lesson 1. And she starts by, right after the problem statement, going into the theoretical framework. And I'm not going to read this to you. I just wanted to point that out. I'd actually argue in these next few section headings that she takes the purpose statement apart. So she's got the theoretical framework, which is how we're going to look at this. This is the lens I'm using. These are the goals of the research. So she talks about what her goals are. And she says that these 2 goals are focusing on understanding how the characteristics of emotional labor manifest themselves in higher education. And 2, examining the relationship between faculty emotions, the environment, and gender. Those are probably a setup for her research questions. She then goes into the significance of the study, and this is the area where she says how this is going to extend existing knowledge. So she does cover that. She just covers that in the purpose segment. It's not the statement, but the purpose segment of the study. Within this significance of the study, she does go on to say down here why she is using a mixed method approach. And she cites what a mixed method approach is and why it relates back to the goals of her research. And then she goes further into taking those goals of research and turning them into 3 research questions, which she pretty much uses for introduction. The last piece is the organization. This is her last paragraph. This is not a summary of what you just read. Rather, this is a roadmap of what you're going to be reading in chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5. Dr. Grace's area of study and the way she has put together her introduction, to me, has a really good golden thread. And I don't think she actually needs a summary. I know she's answered these 3 big questions already, and I could tell you what they are. We already know why we need to know more about the topic. We now know in that segment where she talked about the significance of the study, how she's going to contribute or extend existing knowledge. And she's talked using the theoretical frameworks and the research question about how she will be framing and scoping her research. And I don't think it's necessary in this case to add a summary, so I think that's fine. The organization may be something that her institution wants her to do. So that may be why she put it there, or it just may be a convention that she felt more comfortable with. In summary for our mini lesson, thank you for holding on through this mini lesson. I know that it was a little bit longer because it takes a little bit longer to demo things. I hope you don't mind. And I hope you enjoyed seeing how Dr. Grace's inverted triangle can look a little bit different from the Edgewood template and how that worked with the argument that she was constructing. I look forward to taking a look at how you reverse outline your technique. I look forward to seeing how you do your reverse outline this week. Chat with you next week.